This Nintendo Switch 2 launch is one of the most exciting launches in the history of console launches. Between record-breaking launch weekend sales, an absurd amount of stock available, something that's been unseen since, 2003, hackers finding the earliest entrance door into the Switch's system within the first 24 hours, people being able to run game backups starting from the first week, those same people facing console bans, those banned consoles getting sold on the black market or even being returned and sold to a new user, all of the while prices are higher than they've ever been in the Nintendo world and in cases like Mario Kart World and the entire gaming industry for a regular game. And not to mention the absurd prices on the earlier console that still haven't gone down and in some regions have even gone up. Well, if you want to add to all of that mess, Nintendo's getting sued. Or at least they're in the early stages of this. Now, I can address this video in a few different ways. I could put a hate hat on, go on about how much they deserve this and how they shouldn't be punishing people that spend $500 on their device. I could talk about their outdated and draconian practices and how they just can't get away with that anymore. Or I can get into the semantics and discuss the differences between a console ban and a console brick. And depending on where you sit on this whole situation, you'll either think I'm just discussing semantics, or you'll tell me that no matter what, if you FA, you will certainly FO. So how about instead, we just skip all of that. Let's put this in a little bit of a more level-headed discussion. I've already had my fun console ban video. I've had a different video about the differences between a console ban and a console brick. I've had videos about Nintendo lawsuits. I've had videos about emulation, piracy, and the such. And I just don't feel like doing it again. But I think all of those points are relevant to this discussion, and I think there's something very interesting about this whole situation that many people aren't really talking about, and I'd like to delve deeper into that discussion. So first off, the headlines state that the Brazilian agency formally notified Nintendo over console bricking EU-LA clause. Basically, Nintendo's end-user license agreement tied to the Nintendo Switch 2 console has reportedly been deemed abusive by a Brazilian consumer protection agency, ironically known as Procon. I wonder if there's a case in Brazil called Procon versus Joy-Con. That's something to look up later. Over the company's ability to permanently disable the Nintendo Switch 2 units of users who Nintendo has found to have violated the contract. The agency has reportedly put the company on official notice over its Nintendo Switch 2 policies, which it claims violates Brazilian consumer protection laws. Which is a no-brainer, of course it does. In almost every other society, it would be a no-brainer, but in the world that we live in today, yeah, it's debatable. Because obviously, Procon SP, the Sao Paulo branch of the Brazil's Consumer Protection and Defense Program, doesn't like that Nintendo maintains the ability to terminate user accounts and to render their consoles permanently inoperable without giving a valid reason. It's a violation of the nation's Consumer Protection Code Section 8.078/90, which under its own language seeks to meet consumer needs to respect their dignity, health, and safety, to protect their economic interests, to improve their quality of life, and to ensure transparency and harmony in consumer relations. Now, since Nintendo does not have a legal presence in Brazil, Brazil had to reach out to Nintendo of America, who has since hired lawyers and sent them down to Brazil to deal with this. Supposedly, they got like 20 days to answer. This is an ongoing thing. So first, to give some general idea of the discussion around this, a lot of people from Brazil laugh and say that the Procon is one of the only citizen-friendly initiatives set up in the entirety of Brazil, so it's actually very strong over there. And at the same time, a lot of people online are just like, well, yeah, who cares about Brazil? Nintendo can just cut them off and then to move on from that. They don't need the Brazilian sales. Yeah, well, here's the thing. When a national agency is going after you, usually at that point, it becomes a discussion internationally if you're a product that's being sold international. This is kind of where it already starts. And as many people have correctly pointed out, the terms of service in Europe already don't say this. So there's already a standard setup where Nintendo can get away with saying something in one location and not doing the same thing in a different location. Now, to be clear, a lot of people have kind of mixed things up, and that's why I was getting into the semantics a little bit more in previous videos, and I'd like to quickly swing through why there's so much confusion. So this all starts from Nintendo requiring people to agree to their new terms of services roughly one-ish months before the Nintendo Switch 2 came out. And if I remember correctly, this was applied to the Nintendo Switch 1 as well at this point. The changes in the terms of services basically went from we can ban your console to we can brick your console. Banning is a lack of access to online services outside of firmware updates. And that's strictly firmware updates. Those are the updates that update your consoles, not the updates that update your games. So you can update your games, not over the internet at least. There's a local update discussion if you have a second Switch, but that's a whole different discussion. Or, in the case of the Switch 1, if you got banned because your Switch is modded, there are third-party ways online where you could still update your games and get your DLCs if you'd like. That's a console ban. You do not have access to Nintendo's online services, and that includes eShops and updates and all that stuff. Anything you have already downloaded and is currently sitting on your Switch, you can still play. So if you had a library of 30 games on your Switch when you got banned, those 30 games will remain on your Switch and you will still be able to play them. If you downloaded all of your library of Switch 1 games onto the Switch 2 and it's on your SD card and it's on your hard drive, you're good to go to continue to play those games, but you will not be able to add any more digital titles. But that's only if you've downloaded them. If you've bought them and they're sitting in the store, you cannot download them onto that device without buying another $500 Switch 2, or obviously playing them on your Switch 1, if you have one. In addition to that, you can play every physical Switch 2 game as long as those games are actually on the cartridge, which I'm not mistaken means from the entirety of the current Switch 2 library, you'd be able to play Mario Kart World, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 Edition, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Switch 2 Edition, Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition, and I think Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, and that's it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure everything else is going to require some form of an internet connection and access to the Nintendo Switch eShop in order to play the games. But yeah, you can expect this kind of pattern going forward. It's going to be basically a first-party system that you can play on if your console is banned. A vast majority of third-party titles will be inaccessible, either because they're on a game key card, or because they're going to be one of those titles where half of it is on the cartridge and the other half is a download from the store, although I doubt that's going to be as popular now because most of those companies will just do the game key card instead. And in the case of WWE 2K25, the ever-popular method of purchasing a box with nothing but a download code inside it, which gives you access to the eShop to download a file that's going to be close to 80 gigabytes on your internal hard drive of your Switch 2. Yeah, that's the typical third-party support that the Nintendo Switch gets. Old ports or games that are just take up way too much space on your hard drive. And the Switch 2 is somehow going to be able to compete with everybody else when it comes to third-party. So basically, the point is that if your console is banned, it becomes a first-party device and pretty much nothing else. The other issue, however, is the ability to play Switch 1 games on the Nintendo Switch 2. As it stands, some of them work fine, and others are going to require patches for the titles. Patches and updates that you obviously cannot download without access to the Switch's online server, or like I said before, having a second Switch nearby potentially could work. Now, in most previous Nintendo console generations, this wouldn't necessarily be as critical. Despite the consoles being backwards compatible, the focus of Nintendo has always been on the upcoming Switch 2 titles. But Nintendo on the Switch had this whole thing where they started porting over Wii U titles, and now for the Switch 2, they're trying to make it so that you're taking the Switch 1 titles and playing them enhanced on the Switch 2, and that's how they're justifying not dropping any of the prices of the previous generation. Basically, the biggest focus of the Switch 2, at least for the early few years of this console's life, is going to be Switch 1 titles. That's the selling point, because it's effectively a pro console, right? They have a few exclusives, but it's mostly just the previous games, just like the new 3DS XL. There were some titles that were exclusive to the new 3DS XL, but it was just considered a 3DS. The switch to the Switch 2 is effectively the exact same model. Many games are going to be launching on both consoles. The cartridges are interchangeable and they work on both models, but there are going to be some games that only work on the Switch 2. For now, that's Mario Kart World and the upcoming Donkey Kong Bonanza, for example. So in the same manner that people bought a new 3DS with the intention of still playing their original 3DS titles, they're buying a Switch 2 with the intention of playing their Switch 1 titles. But not just playing them enhanced, which was exactly what you did on the new 3DS. And this is problematic because if your console is banned, you can't guarantee that all of your Switch 1 games will work on the Switch 2. Not yet, at least. Maybe in a few years from now, if you bought a Switch 2 and it's banned and it's already been updated to the latest firmware and it's patched and everything, then at that point you have a console that effectively can play all of your physical non-game keycard titles. But as it stands right now, if you were to get banned, you don't guarantee that your Switch 1 library will be able to be usable on the Switch 2 physically, which is very different than how it was with the Switch 1. And this is where a lot of the discussion differs. This is why people are like, oh, this has always been the case. Why are they making a big deal now? And Sony's done it and Xbox has done it. So first off, if you had a Nintendo Switch 1 and it got banned, you can pretty much guarantee almost every single physical cartridge, or at least a massive library of games, are still going to work from the day you got banned until the console's end of life cycle. I would know I had a banned Nintendo Switch. Physical games always worked without me having to tinker. Updates, DLC, stuff like that requires mods and tinkering. But if you just buy a physical cartridge and throw it into your banned console, it always works. Third party or first party doesn't matter because there was no such thing as game key cards, drastically shrinking the size of that library. But with the Switch 2, that pool, that library, that access of what you can do after your console gets banned is so much smaller than what was available before. There is more reliance now on an internet connection for the Nintendo Switch 2 than there has ever been on any Nintendo Switch console, any Nintendo console rather, ever in the past. And that's a big reason why this is making more news than it ever has before. It's a big reason why people are calling their banned Switch 2s bricks. And everybody likes to be like, Nintendo hasn't bricked any console yet. Well, you're right, they haven't bricked a console yet. But the banned Switch 2 is so much closer to being a brick than any console that has come before it. And that's strictly from a Nintendo perspective. But since we're talking about a Nintendo console, we're comparing it to Nintendo consoles. I'll talk about the other guys in a second, so just wait around for a minute. But you, as a Nintendo buyer, and myself as a Nintendo buyer, well, not a Switch 2 buyer, but previous Nintendo buyer, we should be looking for any reason to protect the rights of Nintendo owners. When you buy something, it should be yours to modify, to tinker with, to fix, to take apart, to rebuild as you please. This isn't a discussion about piracy. Because if it was, Nintendo would find a way to catch people that are pirating and just ban them only. But they're banning people for using third-party devices that are not pirating anything. They went after people on the Switch 1 for just making their game perform better or have a better camera angle, a game that they bought, they spent the money on, they ripped their ROM from, or maybe didn't even rip their ROM from, use their actual cartridge on the actual device to overdrive and overclock the device to make Tears of the Kingdom perform better, for example. A YouTuber was using alternate angles to show Splatoon and make it look better when they were for their YouTube channel, and Nintendo shut them down. These are not situations of piracy. These are situations of obsessive control. They want to shut down anything that makes their product look better because then the people that are buying their product are gonna wonder why Nintendo is not making it better. This has very little to do with piracy. And even if it did have to do with piracy, if you're okay with somebody's $500 device getting bricked because they decided to pirate, I hope you're okay with your phone or your PC getting bricked because you decided to watch an illegal stream. Imagine Google Chrome just suddenly decided that you can no longer access Chrome on your computer because you downloaded an ad blocker. That's the kind of stuff that Nintendo is doing. You're just looking at it from the wrong angle. Now, as far as Sony is concerned, as well as Microsoft, they've had account bans as well. These bans often occur because people go online and they cheat in online gaming sessions, they harass other players, account manipulation sometimes occurs, sometimes they ban the accounts because of chargebacks. There are numerous reasons as to why they do it. And while I am not in support of that as well, they have an appeal option on their website, and many people that have been wrongfully banned have gone through the appeal and got their ban lifted, or altogether earned a new console from Sony. But look, at the end of the day, this isn't a Nintendo versus Sony versus Microsoft situation. And this is something that I've been trying to dig into people's heads from the beginning. We, buyers, customers, are all on the same side. There are those that are selling us the game consoles, and we're the ones buying it. The sellers are all working together. That's why their prices all move up together. They take turns pushing that limit further and further out, and once one gets away with it, all of the others follow suit, and then they point and say, well, yeah, they're doing the same thing. Who cares if they're doing the same thing? If anything, the fact that Nintendo is getting this much attention is great because hopefully that sets a precedent for the rest of the industry. And part of the reason Nintendo is getting this much attention is because precedents have been set elsewhere. It's an ongoing battle between the buyer and the seller, the corporation and the customer of the largest entertainment industry in the entire world. So this isn't this is what they've been doing and that's what they've been doing and it doesn't matter. That's all irrelevant to the discussion. The only thing that matters right now is what Nintendo is doing and how much of a pushback we can do to make sure that everybody stops doing it. It's like the PC buying situation, right? Like I recently finally after like 15 years bought a PC. I spent a lot of money on it and I supported Nvidia. I wanted something very strong, both for gaming and primarily for my YouTubing. And everyone's like, oh yeah, he's willing to spend as much money as possible on an Nvidia chip. And meanwhile, he's going hard against Nintendo. Even with what I've spent on my PC, it is a fraction of the money that I've spent towards Nintendo over the past half a decade alone, let alone my entire life. No matter where you look on the internet, there are bad customer practices, specifically in this industry. There are even hardcore Steam Deck defenders that will find ways to criticize Steam. It is not about this tribalistic fight against one another. When we give our money to these companies and these corporations, we should expect the best treatment from them, not go at each other and cut each other's throats because I bought from this guy or he bought from that person. As a Nintendo fan, you should be fully in support of anything that is a defense of customer rights against Nintendo. Even if you don't care about modification and you think everybody pirates, anything that is a defense for the customers, for the buyers, is ultimately in your benefit. And the hope is that by Nintendo getting a pushback on some of their draconian measures, the other companies have to follow suit. The same way they follow suit when one raises the prices of their games or their devices, and the other ones all just follow right along and raise their prices as well. When one of them gets kicked back for being anti-customer, the other ones realize, oh, that's the limit, I can't do that. We are all gamers. That's the bottom line. It's not about whataboutism. It's just we're gamers and we're buying, and we need the best protection for our rights in an industry where every single day we have fewer and fewer ownership of the stuff that we're buying. And now, once again, I'm bringing this back to Nintendo because I am a Nintendo fan. I am not a PlayStation buyer. And what I'm saying in regards to Nintendo goes double for Sony, which I think are probably even worse. Sure. But as a Nintendo guy, now I have to be careful in the secondhand market. This is what Nintendo has wanted from the beginning, from the 90s when they sued Blockbuster. They wanted to make sure that people were only comfortable buying their games directly from Nintendo. Consoles are getting banned. Now the secondhand market is feeling shady. Digital games have become more and more prevalent, so there is less already of a secondhand market as it is. And game keycards eventually are going to be useless when Nintendo randomly decides to pull the plug on them to make sure people are buying more modern games. At this point in time, if I wanted to buy a Nintendo Switch 2 that was used, they've given me even more hoops to jump through. Now, I'm fairly well versed in this stuff. I know how to protect myself. But I don't know, what if my aunt wanted to buy a game for her kids? Ends up deciding that the Switch 2 is too expensive brand new, saves herself a couple $100, buys a Switch 2 on Facebook Marketplace, banned. Nothing you can do about it. And what, you want her to do her due diligence? You want her to know that consoles are banned much easier now than they've ever been before? You know what's going to happen? She's never going to buy used again, which is what Nintendo wants. And apparently that's what Nintendo fans want as well. They want people to get burned, even if they don't deserve to get burned, also that they can feel vindicated about this console war because they were bullied in grade school by Sony fans or something. And again, that's me just speaking to Nintendo fans. I'm assuming there are some weird other issues with people that are fanboys of different consoles as well, or even PC fans. Because anybody that defends something that you're giving your money to the extent of which I see people defending online, clearly has some kind of baggage as to why they're doing the defense. I genuinely hope Nintendo gets a major backlash from this with this Brazilian lawsuit, and it just grows to a scale that is unimaginable. Because they absolutely deserve it. I'm not saying they deserve failure, but they at least deserve to have to come out and be like, hey, we're updating our terms of services now. We're no longer going to have a clause in there that we can break your device. And the whole thing about not being allowed to sue us anymore, yeah, legally, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, so we're going to remove that as well. Yeah, that's all I got for today. Also, for you regulars that were watching my video yesterday about the Canada stuff where I discussed the fake 5 million sales number that was not real, Nintendo was obviously addressed about it, and they obviously said, yeah, this was like a forecast thing, it's not relevant to the actual numbers of the first month sales. I don't really want to make a whole video on that. But I figured I'd just mention it at the end of this video because it is something newsworthy, but it's not worth making a whole video on. If you missed the Canada video, check that one out. I think around the 8-minute mark is when I discussed the 5 million 1-month sales number. Either way, that's all I got for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.